In the mountain villages, old people still pass down a warning. If you meet a tiger in the forest, fear the tiger. But if, deep in the woods, you see a stranger standing ahead of you and silently beckoning you to follow, be even more careful. Because sometimes, the person calling you forward has been dead for a very long time. Nam had heard that warning before. He just never imagined that one day, the figure calling to him from the forest would have his father's face. It was almost dawn. Nam was halfway along a mountainside when an old tiger stepped out of the brush below and blocked the shortest trail back to the village. Higher up the slope, behind Nam, his father suddenly stopped. Slowly, Min raised one arm and began beckoning his son to come down. The movement was so slow that Nam could see every curl of his fingers. But the direction his father was calling him toward was exactly where the tiger stood. Nam stepped back at once. Min fought to pull his arm down. The wounds across his neck tore open again. He struggled against whatever was controlling him until he finally forced out a single word. Don't. The father, who had been dead for 9 years, finally managed to lower his arm. The tiger roared. Min pointed toward a narrow trail cutting across the mountainside. Run! Then he raised 2 fingers to his lips. One long whistle echoed across the ridge, followed by 2 short ones. Years ago, that signal had meant only one thing to Nam. His father was home. But this time, it meant something completely different. Go home. To understand why a man who had been dead for 9 years was standing in that forest, and why he was fighting the force that was trying to make him call his own son toward a tiger, we have to go back 9 years. Nam grew up in a small village at the foot of the mountains in western Thanh Hoa province, Vietnam. Back then, many families still lived in stilt houses. Mornings began with chickens beneath the floors, the sound of firewood being split, and neighbors calling to one another before heading to the fields. By late afternoon, cooking smoke drifted from the rooftops below the mountains. The forest began almost directly behind the village. On clear days, Nam could stand on the steps of his house and see layer after layer of green mountains stretching into the distance. Children there learned early that the forest might look close, but the deeper you went, the more places there were that adults absolutely forbade them from entering. If anyone asked why, the adults rarely explained. They simply said, "Don't go into those places." Nam's father was named Min. He had spent most of his life working in and around the forest. He gathered bamboo shoots, cleared hillside fields, cut bamboo for hire, and when needed, guided people from the village along remote mountain trails. Min knew the forest well. He knew which streams had safe drinking water and which slopes were likely to give way after heavy rain. Sometimes, just from the smell of the soil, he could tell a storm was coming. He could hear a change in a bird's call and know there was a dangerous animal somewhere ahead. When Nam was little, his favorite days were the ones when his father let him come along for part of the journey. Min was not the kind of father who hugged his son often or said sentimental things. He showed his love in smaller ways. On wet rocks, he showed Nam exactly where to place his feet. When the wind picked up, he taught him to watch the treetops so he would remember his direction. If the straps on Nam's carrying basket came loose, Min made him untie them and start again until the knot was right. And every time Min came home from the forest, before he even reached the edge of the village, he would whistle for his son. One long note, then 2 short ones. Nam knew the signal so well that even if he barely heard it in the distance, he would run outside to meet him. Once, Nam's mother laughed and scolded him. "Your father hasn't disappeared. Why do you run out there every time like the house is on fire?" Nam only laughed. Back then, he had no idea there would come a night when he would sit on those same steps until late, waiting for that familiar whistle, and never hear it again. Nam was 10 years old, When, one morning, Min prepared to head into the forest and promised he would be home early. There was a festival in the village that day, and Nam kept begging his father to take him. Min tightened the brush knife at his waist, rubbed his son's head, and said, "I'll be home before dark." Nam remembered those words for years. Sometimes, a child can hold on to one broken promise longer than 100 happy memories. That afternoon, Min did not come home. Evening passed. Then, midnight. There were no footsteps outside the house and no whistle from the edge of the village. The next morning, men from the village went into the forest to search for him. They found his carrying basket torn apart, one sandal, and a length of strap stained with blood. Farther away, they found enormous tiger tracks pressed into the ground, but they never found Min. The search continued for days before it finally had to stop. Nam's mother set up an altar for her husband. From then on, the family had his photograph, incense, and an anniversary of his death. But they had no grave. Nam grew older and almost never admitted that part of him was angry with his father. Yet somewhere inside him, the 10-year-old boy from that night never disappeared. That boy was still sitting on the steps, waiting for one long whistle followed by two short ones, and asking the same question no one could answer. Dad promised. So why didn't he come home? 9 years later, near the end of the rainy season, heavy rain caused part of a forested mountainside to collapse. Large trees were ripped from the ground, and mud and rock tore down the slope, exposing an old forest trail that had been buried beneath vines and thick brush for years. Almost no one in the village used that route anymore. The next morning, 3 men went up to inspect the landslide. By afternoon, only 2 came back. The third man was missing. The 2 who returned said that around midday, the 3 of them had split up while moving around a rocky outcrop. The man in front had barely disappeared from sight when one of the others saw him farther down the slope, standing there and looking upward as if he were talking to someone. Higher on the mountain, they could just make out the shape of another man. The figure stood still for a moment, then turned and walked away. The missing man followed him. By the time the other 2 made it around the rock, both men were gone. That afternoon, they went back to mark the area so a proper search could begin the next morning. In the freshly exposed earth, one of them noticed an old brush knife. Most of the blade was rusted, and the wooden handle had begun to rot. But near the end of the handle were 2 carved lines. When the knife was brought back to the village, Nam's mother recognized it immediately. So did Nam. It had belonged to Min. Years earlier, after someone accidentally took the wrong knife, Min had carved those 2 lines into the handle so he could always tell his apart. What no one could explain was where it had been found. The knife was much deeper in the forest than any area they had searched 9 years earlier. Some people thought Min might have survived the tiger attack long enough to keep moving. Others thought the tiger may have dragged him farther into the forest and the knife had fallen somewhere along the way. Too much time had passed. No one could say for sure. But for Nam, that knife was enough to bring back a hope he thought he had given up years ago. The next morning, the men of the village divided into groups and went into the forest to search for the missing man. Nam went with them. The man had been gone for less than a day. If he was injured or simply lost, there was still a chance they could find him alive. But Nam also knew they would be searching the same area where his father's knife had appeared. And somewhere inside him was another hope. Maybe this time he would find something else, another belonging, another clue, or, if he was lucky, some part of his father's remains. Nam's mother did not stop him. She sat on the floor holding her husband's old knife for a long time. She understood that Nam was going into the forest to look for a living man. But after 9 years without even a grave for his father, she also understood why he could not ignore this clue. Before Nam left, she gave him only one warning. Stay with the others, and do not do anything reckless because of your father. Nam nodded and left. His mother remained where she was, holding the old knife tightly in both hands and watching her son until he disappeared from sight. Near the landslide, the forest trail split into several paths. The searchers divided up and agreed to meet back at a large rock before dark. Nam took the eastern slope. As he searched for signs of the missing man, he also watched every patch of earth newly exposed by the rain, hoping to find something connected to his father. For a long time, there was nothing. Then he saw a clear, barefoot print in the wet mud. It looked fresh. Nam immediately thought of the missing man and called out several times. No one answered. The footprints led down a short slope, through thick vegetation, then curved left. Nam followed them. After a while, a violent crack exploded behind him. A section of the trail he had just crossed collapsed into a ravine. If he had been only a little slower, he might have been standing directly on it. Nam looked back toward the footprints. They continued deeper into the forest. He followed a few more steps. Then something began to feel wrong. He looked back toward where the tracks had started. There were no footprints coming down from higher ground, none coming out of the bushes. The first print simply appeared in the middle of the trail, as if whoever had made it had been standing there from the beginning and only then started walking. Nam called out again, "Who's there?" The forest stayed silent. Clouds settled low over the mountains, and darkness came faster than he expected. Nam decided to return to the meeting point, but the collapse had blocked the old path. He tried another direction. The farther he went, the more the trees around him seemed to look the same. Every direction felt as if he had already passed through it. When he could no longer see the large rock and could no longer hear the other searchers calling to one another, Nam realized he was lost. Night falls quickly in a mountain forest. A short time earlier, Nam had still been able to make out the trail. Now the trees were nothing but black shapes crowded together. He found a slightly raised patch of ground and gathered dry branches to make a fire. The first match had barely caught when a long whistle came from somewhere in the forest. Nam looked up. Then came two short whistles. The flame burned almost to his fingertips before he realized it and dropped the match. He sat completely still and listened. The forest went silent again. Nam told himself it might have been a bird. Forests are full of sounds that can briefly resemble a human voice. Then the signal came again. One long whistle, followed by two short ones. This time, Nam knew he had not imagined it. There are sounds you can go 9 years without hearing and still recognize before your mind has time to understand why. Nam jumped to his feet and called out, "Who's there?" No one answered. He took a few steps toward the sound. Between two trees about 30 yards away stood a man. It was too dark to see his face. His clothes were old and dark, almost disappearing into the trees behind him. Nam called again. The man said nothing. He simply lifted one hand, beckoned once, and turned away. There was nothing strange about the gesture itself, but in the middle of a dark forest, seeing a faceless stranger silently waiting for you and motioning for you to follow sent a chill down Nam's spine. Nam did not move. Then he heard something behind him, a deep, heavy breath. A low bush trembled. The wind carried the foul animal smell of a wild predator. Then came a low growl. Nam had no time to think. He ran after the man. The stranger never seemed to run. He simply walked at a calm pace. Yet no matter how fast Nam moved, he could not catch up. They passed through a rocky gap, moved down a slope, and reached a fallen tree lying across the trail. And there, the man disappeared. Nam pressed himself against the rock wall and held his breath. For a while, leaves rustled somewhere in the distance. Then, everything went quiet. Only after a long time did Nam dare to stand. Beneath the fallen tree, he noticed something small among the leaves. He picked it up and struck another match. It was what remained of a small bamboo whistle. One end was cracked. The body was old, but still intact, and carved into it were 3 diagonal cuts. Nam recognized them immediately. When he was little, he had once played with a knife and carved those marks into the bamboo whistle his father had made for him. Min had scolded him for it. A few days later, the whistle disappeared. Nam had always assumed he had dropped it somewhere, and now, 9 years later, he was holding it in the very forest where his father had vanished. First his father's knife, now the whistle. Nam was still afraid, but the longer he stared at it, the more a hope began to rise inside him, one he barely dared to believe. Maybe Min had left behind more traces than anyone realized, and maybe somewhere deeper in this forest, there was still an answer to what had happened to his father 9 years ago. The next morning, Nam found a stream. Nearby, a torn piece of fabric hung from a thorn bush. From the color, he thought it might belong to the missing man. Nam shouted and searched the area. No one answered. There was no blood and no sign of more footprints, only the strange man from the night before. Every so often, he appeared somewhere ahead, on top of a rock, behind a tree, always close enough for Nam to see, but never close enough to reach. Eventually, Nam stopped following him. Not long afterward, a low growl came from the direction Nam had been planning to take. Nam turned. The man was still standing in the opposite direction, waiting. Nam began to understand. Whoever this man was, he seemed to know where the tiger was, and he seemed to be helping Nam avoid it. But something else was becoming harder to ignore. Every time the stranger helped him escape danger, Nam ended up deeper in the forest, never closer to home. By noon, exhausted and hungry, Nam finally refused to go any farther. He called out to the man. If he truly wanted to help, why would he not lead Nam straight out of the forest? The stranger did not answer. Nam told him that if all he wanted was to lure him somewhere, then he was not following anymore. The man lowered his head and turned away. He had taken only a few steps when the ground beneath Nam suddenly cracked. Nam managed to grab a tree root just in time. Half his body hung over a rocky crevice. His brush knife slipped from his hand and disappeared below. The root began tearing loose. Just as Nam was about to lose his grip, a hand seized the strap of the carrying basket on his back and pulled hard. Nam collapsed onto solid ground, gasping for air. The stranger was kneeling beside him. For the first time, they were close. The man said nothing. He picked up the loosened strap, looped it twice, pulled the loose end back to the left, and tightened it. Nam stared at his hands. His heart started pounding. When Nam was a child, Min had made him untie and retie that exact knot more times than he could count. His father always said that if you tied things carelessly in the forest, one day you would lose the whole basket. The stranger stood. Nam stared at the knot, and everything from the past 2 days rushed together in his mind. The whistle signal, the bamboo whistle, the old knife, and now a knot tied exactly the way his father had taught him. Nam spoke so quietly it was almost a whisper. "Dad." The man froze for just a moment. He did not turn around. Then he started walking again. Nam stood there in shock for several seconds, then ran after him. He caught up with the man in a rocky clearing between 2 mountain walls. The stranger stopped at the far end. This time, Nam would not let him simply walk away. "Dad." The man still did not turn around. Nam told him that if he was not his father, all he had to do was turn around and let Nam see his face. A long time passed. Then the man slowly turned. Nam had always imagined that if he ever saw his father again, he would recognize him instantly. But 9 years was a long time, and the face in his memory had faded. So Nam studied him feature by feature: the forehead, the nose, the small scar beneath the chin. Then the eyes. When he saw those eyes, there was no doubt left. The man standing in front of him was Min, but he had not aged a day. He still had the face of the man in his 30s from the photograph on the family altar. He was still wearing the same shirt he had worn on the morning he disappeared, torn at one shoulder. Only his neck and chest were different. Dark marks covered the places where old wounds had once been. Nam took a step toward him. Min immediately stepped back. The first thing the father said to his son after 9 years was, "Why did you come in here?" His voice was rougher than Nam remembered, but it was still his father's voice. Joy, fear, anger, and 9 years of pain all collided inside Nam at once. In the end, he could ask only one question. "Are you alive?" Min looked at his son, then slowly shook his head. That was enough. Nam understood. His father had died 9 years ago. Whatever stood in front of him now was only what remained. Min told Nam he had to leave the forest before nightfall. Nam asked which way led out. Min did not answer. He asked about the missing man. Again, Min said nothing. Then Nam asked him directly whether he had been the one who led that man into the forest. Min stopped. He did not turn around, and he did not deny it. That silence made Nam's blood run cold. He suddenly remembered the stories old people in the region used to tell about those killed by tigers. They believed that some people who died beneath a tiger's teeth could not leave the forest afterward. Their spirits remained trapped there, held within the tiger's hunting ground. And whenever another living person became lost in the forest, those spirits would appear. They would lead the traveler deeper, one step at a time, until they reached the place where the tiger was waiting. Those spirits were called Ma Tranh. When Nam was younger, he had thought it was nothing more than a story adults used to frighten children. But now, standing in the darkening forest and looking at his dead father, he began to understand what had happened to the missing man, and why Min was so desperate to get his son out before nightfall. Nam did not ask how many people his father had led into the forest. He only had to look at Min's face to know that the recently missing man had not been the first. Min sat down. The exhaustion on his face was impossible to hide. He explained that after the tiger killed him, his spirit had been trapped there. He could not leave. Whenever another person became lost in the forest, Min was forced to appear and lead them deeper inside. What disturbed Nam even more was realizing that his father was not the only spirit that had ever been forced to do this. Min had resisted before, but every time he did, the wounds from his death returned. The pain came back as though the tiger were killing him all over again. Sometimes he managed to save someone, sometimes he could not, and sometimes the pain became so unbearable that he was forced to keep leading them. Min said no more. Nam did not ask. For 9 years, Nam had believed that dying beneath a tiger's teeth was the worst thing that could have happened to his father. Now he understood that death had not been the end. His father was dead, but his mind was still his own. He remembered his wife. He remembered his son. He recognized every living person he encountered. And worst of all, he always knew when he was leading someone toward death. Nam asked whether his father had ever come close to home. Min said he had, more than once. On the anniversaries of his death, he sometimes stood far up on the mountainside and watched the lights of the village below. Once, he had even heard Nam practicing the old whistle signal. Min had whistled back, but the distance was too great. No one heard him. Nam turned his face away. For 9 years, he had been angry at his father for failing to keep a promise. Now he finally understood. His father had not stayed away because he did not want to come home. He stayed away because he could not. Evening was coming. Min told Nam they had to move, then explained the one weakness in the tiger's control. The tiger could force him to lead a living person toward its hunting ground, but it could not force him to choose one exact path. That was the loophole. Ever since Nam became lost, Min had deliberately taken him around rocky ravines, along higher slopes, and away from the places where the tiger usually waited. He still had to lead Nam toward the tiger, but he could choose a longer route. He could delay them. He could make it harder for the tiger to catch up. So from the very beginning, Min had not truly been leading his son to his death. He had been stretching the journey out for as long as possible, trying to save him. Min pointed toward a distant mountainside. On the other side was an old firewood trail that curved around the slope and eventually led down toward the village. If Nam could reach it before sunrise, he would be able to find his own way home. Nam asked what would happen to his father. Min looked at him. "I'm already dead, Nam." He asked his son to remember only one thing. Do not let another living person die because of someone who is already gone. Nam said nothing. He did not ask again. The two of them started walking. For the first time since Nam had encountered him in the forest, Min no longer kept his distance. He walked only a few steps ahead, just as he had years ago when Nam was a little boy, following his father through the woods. The journey was long, but for a brief stretch, it was one of the only peaceful moments the two of them had together. The tiger's calls faded into the distance. The only sound in the forest was Nam's footsteps on dry leaves. Min moved ahead of him, almost silently. After a while, Min asked how Nam's mother was doing. Nam told him she had grown much older. Her hair was turning gray, and her back hurt whenever the weather turned cold. But every year on the anniversary of Min's death, she still placed the foods he used to love on the family altar. Min was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you know how to clear a field yet?" Nam laughed. "I'm 19. Min stopped. It took Nam a few seconds to understand why. In his father's memory, the son he had left behind was still 10 years old. Min looked at him from head to toe for a long time. Then he said softly, "Yeah, you're all grown up." Nam looked away. That one simple sentence was enough to bring a lump to his throat. Not because his father did not know he had grown up, but because for 9 years, Min had never been able to watch it happen. Near midnight, the tiger called again. The sound was still far away, but Min immediately stopped. His hands tightened, and the dark marks around his neck seemed to deepen. Before Nam could ask what was wrong, Min's right arm slowly began to rise. His finger pointed toward a dark slope on their left, the exact opposite direction from where they had been going. Min immediately grabbed his right arm with his left hand. His whole body shook with pain. "Don't go where I'm pointing." His right arm kept pulling toward the slope. The tiger roared again, closer this time. Min dropped to his knees. The old wounds across his neck and chest seemed to come alive again, twisting his body with pain. Nam moved toward him. Min shouted for him to stay back. It took a long time before he finally managed to force his arm down. Watching his father struggle to breathe, Nam understood. The tiger knew. It had realized Min was deliberately leading him away, and now it was tightening its control. Near dawn, the trees began to thin. From an opening on the mountainside, Nam could see cooking smoke rising far below. Home was close. Ahead of him, a steep slope led down toward the old firewood trail. From there, Nam could make his way back to the village. Min stopped. He would not go any farther. Nam understood. This was as close to home as his father could bring him. For years, Nam had imagined that if he ever saw his father again, he would ask why he never came back and whether he still remembered his son. Now those questions had answers. Only one thing remained. Nam asked where his father's remains were. Min looked back toward the deep forest, then answered quietly, "There's nothing left for you to find." Nam lowered his head. He had entered the forest to search for the missing man, but after finding his father's knife, part of him had also hoped he might finally bring something home after 9 years. A bone, a belonging, anything. In the end, he had not found the missing man, and he could not bring his father home in the way he had once imagined. Min told him to follow the firewood trail back to the village. Nam stood there for a moment. Then he repeated the words his father had spoken on the last morning he was alive. "You said you'd be home before dark." Min froze. Nam smiled, but his eyes had turned red. "It's been 9 years." Min lowered his head. A long time passed before he managed to say, "I'm sorry." For years, Nam had imagined that if he ever heard those words, he would have so much anger to throw back at his father. But now that he understood what had really happened, 9 years of resentment seemed small compared with what Min had endured. Nam turned and began walking down the slope. The lower he went, the brighter the forest became. The tiger behind him grew quiet. Morning light spread between the trees, and birds began calling again. Nam thought he was safe. Then a roar came from somewhere below. He stopped. Behind him, Min looked sharply toward the bottom of the slope. The roar had not come from the deep forest behind Nam. It had come from directly ahead. The tiger had gone around them, and now it was blocking the trail. The bushes below parted. The old tiger stepped out. Its coat was dark. One ear was torn. Its shoulders rose almost to a man's chest. There was nothing unnatural about the way it looked, and somehow that made it more frightening. This was a living animal of flesh and blood, but it had killed enough people over enough years that no one in those mountains could think of it as an ordinary tiger anymore. It did not charge. It simply stood below the slope, watching Nam. Higher up, Min suddenly doubled over in pain. Nam turned. His father's arm was rising again. This time, his hand began beckoning Nam down the slope, again and again. Every movement called him directly toward the tiger. Min tried to force his arm down, but he could not. The old wounds across his neck tore open again. He managed only one word, "Don't." But his hand kept calling Nam forward. And in that moment, Nam finally understood. The tiger did not need to attack yet. It only needed to force its trend to call the prey closer. Nam looked at his father. By now, he understood how much pain Min was enduring every time he resisted. He did not need another explanation. Nam asked quietly, "Do you want me to follow you?" Min's hand continued beckoning, but he shook his head. Nam looked at him again. "Do you want me to?" Min closed his eyes. With his free hand, he grabbed his own wrist. Then, with everything he had left, he forced the arm down. The tiger roared. Min collapsed, and his body began to fade. Slowly, as though every time he resisted the tiger, another part of whatever was keeping him in the forest was being used up. Nam panicked and stepped back toward him. "Dad!" Min stared at his own hand as it began to disappear. He did not explain. He simply forced himself upright, then looked toward a narrow trail cutting across the mountainside to Nam's right. The trail curved upward before joining the old firewood path. For the first time, Nam saw his father smile. It was faint, but familiar. The same smile he remembered from childhood. Min pointed toward the trail. "Run!" Nam hesitated. Min raised 2 fingers to his lips, one long whistle, then 2 short ones. For a moment, Nam was 10 years old again, standing below the steps of his house and hearing the sound that meant his father was home. But this time, the whistle was not calling him outside to meet his father. It was telling him to go. The tiger charged up the slope. Min threw himself across its path. Nam turned toward the narrow trail and ran. Behind him came a violent roar. Then he heard his father cry out. Only once. Nam clenched his teeth. He did not look back. He kept running along the narrow trail around the mountainside. He stumbled, fell, got back up, and kept running. At one point, the tiger's footsteps changed direction. They came closer. Then, from somewhere else in the forest, the familiar whistle sounded again. One long note, then two short ones. The tiger immediately turned toward it. Nam understood. His father was still doing what he had been forced to do for 9 years, leading. But this time, Min was not leading a person toward the tiger. He was using himself to lead the tiger away from his son. Nam ran until his legs were nearly numb. At last, the narrow trail joined the old firewood road. The light ahead grew brighter. As the sun rose, Nam finally made it out of the forest. He managed only a little farther before collapsing from exhaustion. That morning, the search party found Nam. The man who had disappeared the day before was never found. Only a few traces of him remained in the forest, and no one dared go any deeper. The old tiger was never seen again. Some villagers believed it moved into another range of mountains. Others thought it died somewhere deep in the forest. Nam never learned which was true. He knew only one thing. After that morning, no one in the village ever again saw the thin man in the old brown shirt with dark wounds across his neck, standing beside forest trails and silently motioning for strangers to follow. When Nam finished telling his mother what had happened, she did not cry. Not at first. She sat quietly for a long time, then asked, "Was it really him?" Nam placed the bamboo whistle on the floor. The 3 carved marks were still there. His mother picked it up. Her hands began to shake. That was enough. The family built Min a grave. There were no bones to bury, no clothes, nothing left of his body. Beneath the earth, they placed only the old bamboo whistle and the rusted brush knife, with 2 carved lines still visible on its wooden handle. On the day they buried them, everyone eventually returned to the village. Nam stayed behind alone. He brushed a thin layer of dust from the grave marker, then stood there looking at his father's name. 9 years earlier, Nam had been angry because his father broke a promise. He had never understood that on that final evening, his father no longer had the chance to come home. Only now did Nam understand. Min had spent all those years trying to return in another way. Nam lowered his head, then raised 2 fingers to his lips. One long whistle, followed by 2 short ones. He did not leave right away. He stood there quietly, waiting for something from the distant forest. No answer came. The mountains remained silent. Nam stayed in front of the grave a little longer, then finally turned away. And for the first time in 9 years, he stopped waiting for his father to come home. Because on that mountainside at dawn, Nam had finally understood something. His father had never forgotten the way home. It had simply taken him 9 years to finish one last thing a father had to do: bring his son home. If you've ever heard a similar story about Ma Tranh, or about spirits believed to be bound to tigers and forced to lure the living into the forest, tell us about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so we can meet again for another tale from folklore.